Good evening. Nice to be with you early in Convocation Week. We have a subject, embracing our spiritual resilience. And I thought I'd start by reading a story about our Guru, something that he had talked about, stories that we're sort of familiar with, but he gives a few more details. And the reason for starting with this is that when we talk about resilience, which is really a term that you really don't find in Master's teachings, I looked. But it's a subject in which Master Paramahansa Yogananda really dealt with in many, many different ways and looked at all of the aspects that brings spiritual resilience, which we'll talk about this evening. But I wanted to read this story about Master because it shows the resilience that our Guru had and what an example he was in this quality. As we know, from the autobiography of a yogi, he came to America after a vision at Ranchi. He was meditating at Ranchi ashram in India, and he saw these faces, the American faces, and he thought, oh, this is America. God is calling me to America. And from that point on, everything was focused on his mission in America. He went to Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Swami Sri Yukteswar gave his blessing, and off he went. Now, he gives details in autobiography of a yogi, but not many. There's just a few things that he talks about. Here in this lecture that he gave some years ago, he gives a few more of what happened behind the scenes, and I thought it was worth talking about. So he had the vision at Ranchi, and then he said, in only a matter of hours after my vision, I bade goodbye to my beloved Ranchi and trained for Calcutta, home of my earthly father. A family friend, a teacher, was visiting him. What brings you from Ranchi, he inquired. I'm going to America, I replied. His astonishment was typical. However, I learned from him that the principal of his college, Mr. Harimba Maitra, was also going to America, and he took me to see this gentleman. It was through my meeting with Mr. Maitra that I became a delegate to the Congress of Religious Liberals, which was to be held in Boston under the auspices of the American Unitarian Association. Friends had made a great fuss of gathering together some ochre robes for my journey, for which I had neither a passport nor money. I was starting out for America like the fellow who polished his whip, even though he had no horse to ride. It was only a short time after World War I had ended, and the first post-war steamer to America, the city of Sparta, was soon to sail. I was told there was no chance of my securing accommodation. As for a passport, the officials were suspicious of everyone as a possible revolutionary, and almost no one was being allowed to leave the country. These were the difficulties in my way. I went to my guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar in Serampore. He told me that all doors were open for my going to America and that it was now or never. So I knew I would go. I went to the shipping office to book passage on the city of Sparta. The English secretary who handled reservations dismissed my request with a wave of his hand. Everything was booked 6 months ago, he said. I didn't give up. I want to go on that ship. His tone was insistent. Everything is booked. There is no vacancy. But I am going on that ship, I persisted. Will you not register my name? Perhaps there will be a cancellation. Impatiently, he took his fountain pen and wrote my name on his cuff. He knew he wouldn't be able to rid himself of me until he did something about my request for booking. All right, he said, but have your passport ready. You can't go without one. The next day, my father asked me to visit a relative, Guru Prasad. I was going to say no. It seems that Satan always tries to mislead us. But instead, I agreed to go. Once there, I immediately told my relative that I was leaving on the first ship to America. It had become my slogan. Mind you, I had no money or passport, but I was going to America. His reaction was not encouraging. You can't get a passport so soon. You know very well it takes several months' investigation before one can be issued. But, I said earnestly, I must go within 1 month. He then told me that there was someone in the next room who might be able to help, a distant relative whom I had never seen before. I went in to meet him feeling timid but determined. Through his instrumentality, I obtained my passport in 7 days. Now that everything else was ready, there was still no money. My father had already expressed disapproval of my plans. "What nonsense is this about your going to America? Who will finance you?" he had said. "Perhaps God will put it into your mind to help me." Never. He looked at me piteously in the last effort to dissuade me, and so we parted. Thus it came as a complete surprise when the next day he gave me a check for first-class accommodations with his blessing. "I am a disciple of the Hiri Mahashai," he explained, "and the Hiri Mahashai is your Param Guru. I want you to go to America to carry his Kriya Yoga teachings to the West." Wistfully, he added, "When will you return?" "In 3 or 4 months," I replied, "if the Americans don't need me." I guess we did, huh? I returned to the steamship booking office. When the agent saw me coming, he lowered his head and frowned. Clearing his throat self-consciously, he said, "Where is your passport?" "Where is my passage?" I countered. "You know, you were awfully lucky." He made a grudging admission. "Someone canceled the cabin reservation. You can have it if you want." I told him I didn't need a whole cabin for myself, but my loving father had insisted on reserving it for me. On the eve of my departure, I went to Sri Yukteswarji to say goodbye. I wept as he bestowed his blessing on me. All the students from the Ranchi school were at the dock the next day to see me off. It was a tearful farewell. Sri Yukteswarji had also come. Boarding the ship, the great Gyan Avatar sat like a sphinx in my cabin, while I continued to shed tears over parting from him and going to a strange land. Finally, he spoke in his calm, reassuring way. "Everything will be all right. God is with you." I cannot begin to describe the feeling of aloneness that overwhelmed me when the steamer left the dock. Except for a few practice attempts, I hardly knew how to speak English, much less lecture in English. I was attired in a makeshift turban and a flannel robe of the traditional ochre color worn by swamis in India. As was also customary among some swamis, I wore a beard, mustache, and long hair. Most of the passengers were American or European, and they eyed me cautiously. You can imagine what a sensation my appearance made among them. A number of amusing rumors were circulating about me. As I had first-class passage, I was thought to be well off, and some speculated that I was also well out of my mind. Word gradually spread that I was going to speak in Boston at the International Congress of Religious Liberals. "You must give us a lecture," one of the passengers insisted. "Please talk on the battle of life and how to fight it." I wished he had not suggested that subject, because I was already engaged in my own battle, preparing to lecture before the passengers the next evening. On one front, I was trying in a single day to familiarize myself with the English language. And on another, I was struggling to organize my rebellious thoughts into a lecture. That evening, the captain introduced me to the assembled passengers, and everything was in readiness for my lecture to begin. For 10 minutes, I stood there without speaking a word, because my mind went blank. It was an unnerving experience. This can't go on, I thought. Inwardly, I called to my guru, and I heard his voice say, "You can. Speak." I started to talk, and from the ease with which the words flowed from me, I knew it was not I who was speaking. After that lecture, everyone thought differently about me and became friendly. Many gave me their cards and invited me to speak at their churches and clubs in America. I was deeply grateful and happy, encouraged that my first lecture in English had been a success. But to this day, I do not know what I said. The voyage took nearly 2 months. Late in September, we docked at Chelsea Harbor near Boston before dawn. As I watched the steamer nearing the landing, and saw America for the first time, my thoughts were very sad. Gazing at the twinkling lights in the harbor, I thought of India and how alone I was here, not a soul I knew. Then I remembered the faces I had seen in vision that day in Ranchi. I have since met and recognized many of them, including some of you who are here today. Others are yet to come. But at that moment on the ship, I realized acutely the difficulty of my situation and felt extremely forlorn. But those sleeping memories of friends once more to be came sweeping over me, banishing my fear and loneliness. This is what our Guru went through in those early years. It's hard to imagine because you come to convocation and you see such a vast audience and all your friends and people from all over the world, and it seems so vibrant and you think it's always been that way. But from our Guru's perspective, when he first came, he had to have that resilience to see, okay, this is what God and his Guru is asking of him. And he had to take those steps necessary to make things come about. It really is also very touching when you think that the Guru, whom we love and revere so much, felt such aloneness, such loneliness, such that there was no one around to help him. How delighted he would be, and is, no doubt, when he comes to convocations like this where he sees so many of his family members from all over the world. Spiritual resilience is the topic tonight. Resilience is simply defined, it's an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. It's a word that's been around for 150 years or so, almost 200. But as I say, our Guru didn't use it in the teachings. I found out why, and I think I found out why. There was a resilience as a study in psychology only became prevalent or only became important in the 1950s, the mid-1950s. 1955 was the first major study on resilience. The reason being was psychologists saw that some of the children who came through World War II, some did well, some didn't, and they were very puzzled as to why that was. So the study of resilience and what makes resilience in people became one of the important aspects of psychology. How do people become resilient? What is it like? What are the qualities of it? It was interesting. I don't know whether you've seen Time magazine 2 to 3 weeks ago, came out with a special issue called The Science of Happiness. It's a whole issue on different aspects of happiness. And one of the articles inside is called How to Bounce Back. Experts know that happiness is strongly connected to how well you rebound from setbacks. They also now know how everyone can get better at it. And basically it's an article on resilience, on the qualities of resilience, what it means, what psychologists are finding in their studies. And I wanted to read just portions of it because it gives a foundation for the talk tonight and really for what our Guru's teachings talk about resilience. It was interesting when I was reading this article, as I was going through the different points that were being made, I was thinking to myself, Master says that. Master says that. Master talks about that. Master knows that. And I just went through the whole article. It's interesting to read science because they deal with the physical and the mental, but they're a little shady on the spiritual end of it. They don't quite understand the concepts of spirituality. So it's incomplete in some ways. And yet, as a foundation, it's profound. But here's what they said in this article. They said, resilience is a set of skills, as opposed to a disposition or a personality type, that make it possible for people not only to get through hard times, but to thrive during and after them. Like the animal whose pulse returns quickly to normal once it has outrun a predator, resilient brains seem to shut off the stress response and return to baseline quickly. Resilient people seem to have the capacity to appropriately regulate fear under conditions of stress. But then they explain why this this idea of resilience and some of the problems that we have in modern society. They said the problem is, even though we're no longer bumping into wolves or predators, we're constantly activating the same neural pathways of fear with everyday stressors, worrying about the future, fretting about the past. Some research shows that even some feelings, like rejection and loneliness, zoom along the same neural pathways as fear. The more we use this neuronal superhighway, the more efficient it grows, and this mode of thinking becomes our default. But new research shows that humans can train their brains to build and strengthen different connections that don't reinforce the fear circuit. Over time, if people use this new pathway enough, it could become the new response to stress. Much of the new evidence suggests that with a little patience and a little practice, anyone can develop resilience. They also found that simple things like regular exercise helps with building resilience. It helps you deal with stress and actually helps to build new neurons in the system. So these type of things are very, very practical ideas to build resilience in our character. But as I say, scientists come at it from the body, the mind, the physical, the mental. They don't quite go to the spiritual. Whereas Master explains things from a spiritual perspective, which goes kind of in the other direction, encompassing it all. Things like, I think if you were to say, what's in Master's teachings that is foundational, that's important to set up a talk about resilience. Well, Master says life is a school. Life is a school. You know, we're here to learn lessons. And until we learn these lessons, we can't really move on. This is something science doesn't quite understand. It's not only this life, but we have past lives. We have reincarnation. We keep trying to learn these lessons as we come back and try to become more skilled at this idea of life and dealing with stresses and things like this. Master says everything that happens to us in life happens for a reason. And I think the yogi, the person who really wants to develop the qualities that he needs, the spiritual qualities, he has to look at things that happen in his life and say, why did this happen? What is it that I'm supposed to learn from this? Because invariably, and I found this in my own life, if I don't do that, then the same problems come up later on. You didn't quite learn the lesson. You didn't quite understand what you were supposed to gain from the thing you went through. Master also says we're placed where we need to be. There's no mistakes there. You know, so things that happen to us, where we're placed, what we're given in life, what our roles, what our duties are. He says in the Bhagavad Gita commentary, he says the cosmic law sees to it that those duties which come to man in the natural course of his life are those he is meant to perform for his own welfare. Those duties that come to man in the natural course of his life are those duties he's meant to perform for his own welfare. There are no mistakes. So knowing that, when we react to things in a way that are not resilient, are not proper, are not the way a yogi should act in different situations. Know that we're not learning that lesson. We're not overcoming the thing that we have to overcome. And of course, life is a school. And if it was a school, and we're going to look at that metaphor, then probably karma is the headmaster. He's the one who gives you what you need to learn. But even to further look at that, for the yogi, if karma is the headmaster, you get to a place where your guru becomes your counselor, your friend, your person who feeds you the karma that you can handle in different times, at any particular time. Resilience. At the basic level, you know, we are kshatriyas. We do agree to take up the fight This is an important concept. You look at you look at great literature. You look at great pieces of stories. It's always the person who makes the effort to fight that inspires us. I was thinking of, in Shakespeare, all of his philosopher kings, all of his warriors that were, the Hamlets and Henry V and Macbeth. These were kings and people who had this ability that no matter what was happening, they would do what they needed to do. The story of Macbeth, as many know, it was foretold that he would become king by 3 witches who read his future. And then his life spiraled out of control because he tried to make these things happen when it didn't seem like they were happening fast enough, and made a lot of mistakes along the way. And at the very end of the play, he's faced with the person he knows is going to kill him. He knows the prophecies that the witches had told him. You're not going to die until the forest marches towards Dunsinane, the castle that he's in. Well, the forest doesn't march. He thought he was free and clear on that one. But sure enough, the army comes up, and in order to camouflage themselves, they cut down the branches in the forest, and they walk up to the castle or march up to the castle with the branches out front. And it looks like a forest is moving. He said, and they tell him, you won't be killed by a man born of a woman. Well, that pretty much is pretty good because it doesn't seem like anyone's going to come up and... But sure enough, there's a warrior named Macduff. He was not, his mother was, he wasn't born by her, he was ripped from her, I guess. So somehow he skirted that. At the end of the play, Macbeth knows. He knows that, okay, his end is here. He sees that if he gives up, he's going to be a traitor. He's going to be called a traitor. His life won't be worth living. And this is what he says. He says, I will not yield to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet, the king who's coming to take over the kingdom. I will not yield to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet. I know all of these curses all of these prophecies have been borne out, and I know that the end is near. He said, yet I will try to the last. Before my body I throw my warlike shield. Lay on, Macduff, and damned be him that first cries, hold, enough. He's willing to die. He's willing to die. Shakespeare loved that. He loved that quality in his heroic characters. And Master did too. Master did too. A and B were fighting together. After a long time, A said to himself, I can't go on. This is too much. And B thought to himself, just one more punch. And he threw it, and down went A. And Master said, be like that. Throw one more punch. Use your unconquerable will. When you're in a position where you don't feel like you can go on, that's how you succeed in life. Master believed in that. He believed in that making the fight, or taking it, doing the most you can with whatever you have. One of the great stories that Master tells, of course, is the autobiography of Yogi, the Tiger Swami. And that's the ultimate extreme sport, getting in a cage with a Bengal tiger with just your bare hands and seeing who wins. And we know the story. It's fascinating. It's a great chapter that many of us have read many times. But Master says in there, quoting the Tiger Swami, he said, in a trice I was within the cage, but as I slammed the door, Raja Begum was headlong upon me. My right hand was desperately torn. But then he said, I rallied instantly from the shock of the first serious injury I had ever received. banishing the sight of my gory fingers by thrusting them beneath my waistcloth, I swung my left arm in a bone-cracking blow. My famous fistic punishment rained on his head. Think about it. Think about the lesson that Master's saying there. Even in times when you don't have everything you need to put up a good battle, this is the ultimate. He lost his right hand. That was probably his knockout punch. So what does he do? He pushes it beneath his waistcloth and he swings his left arm. This is the gumption, the grit that Master wants us to have. And I think it is foundational to developing the resilience that we're trying to have on the spiritual path. One time, Daya Mata was giving a satsang at Mount Washington to the monastics, and she was talking about the spiritual life and some of the difficulties that we were facing. But she said, I don't know exactly, I don't remember what she was talking about, but then she said at the end of it, but what are we? Cowards? And all of the monastics in the room, we felt like, no, we're here to take this on. We're here to make this fight, to make this effort. But what are we, cowards? This is the basis of really success on the spiritual path, this desire, at least, to make the effort and to make to put everything we can into what we're doing and to be successful. Master said that not only that we make this effort and then try to overcome the difficulties in our path, but he also wants us to look at ourselves and to correct those things that need correcting. And it's a big part of the spiritual path. I'm thinking of some instances in Daya Mata's life. She used to say that, Master used to say to her, you must be like steel inside. You must be like steel inside. And you remember that she one time went back to him and said, but sir, I don't like cold people. He said, no, you misunderstand me. He said, no, you must be so strong inside that nothing can affect you. And that was the Daya Mata that I saw through the years that I was privileged to be around her or to see little glimpses of the way she acted in different situations. She was like steel. She had this ability to disengage from the emotions of something happening and just always be that perfectly balanced soul. You must be like steel inside. Master used to always train her in many different ways. Another way that he trained her was, she said that one time she was, it was the middle of the night, Master contacted her and said, asked her about a letter that had come in. Did we receive a letter from so-and-so? And she said, yes, Master, I think we did. It's probably in the office. And he said, well, go get it, will you? And her response was, well, Master, could it wait till the morning? And then Master said, no, do it now. And so Daya Mata, she had the perfect attitude and all of these things. She went and found the letter and brought it to Master. But she always ended up those stories with, oh, the training was tremendous. Master gave tremendous training. I saw a Daya Mata who was utterly unable, completely unable to procrastinate. She had such a sense of doing it now, doing what she needed to do at this particular time. It was really remarkable for someone, and her whole life she was that way. She took these different qualities that Master asked of her to develop, and she not only developed them, but she became a shining example. It's these kinds of things. When we look at ourselves, what are my weaknesses? What can I do to overcome them? How do I become someone who's more resilient and more spiritual, a stronger person with better qualities? Look at what you need to develop and then take small steps toward that. That's a part of the spiritual life. This was something Ma once said. She said, I remember when Master went to the desert and left me with the preparation for the first convocation. So this is a very fitting time to be talking about this, huh? So Master went to the desert and left me with the preparation for the first convocation. That was the first time I thought to myself, he's being unreasonable. I had led a very sheltered life to that point. I had not dealt with the public. I spent many a sleepless night. But imagine what would have happened if I had given up. Where would I be now? It is tremendous training given by Master. That was so typical of Daya Mata. She not only rose to the occasion and did what was asked of her, but she learned the lessons from them and became, really an example of these kinds of qualities. And look at it now. I mean, imagine the first convocation didn't look anything like this. But nonetheless, for someone who was so sheltered and so much in the background for all those years, to have been given that assignment, very difficult. And then we can also learn from things that happen in our own life. It's not only looking at the examples that great souls have shown us, but things that bother us in our own life. One of these psychologists, Richard Davidson, a neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, said a good way to gauge how close you are to resilience is to consider how you react when things don't go your way. He says his research shows that the way we cope with little stressors strongly predicts how we'll do once the big stuff happens. Well, a few weeks ago, this is back last month, I live now in Phoenix, and so I also take care of the Berkeley Temple in Northern California. So I travel back and forth from Phoenix to Berkeley. A few weeks ago, I went to the airport in Phoenix, and I go early in the morning. I go on a Thursday, and I have a Thursday evening service in Berkeley. First hint that I got, I walked in the airport there, and it was just jammed. It was jam-packed, big long lines before 6 in the morning. And I'm thinking to myself, this isn't normal. When I finally get up to the counter, I said, what's going on here? And they said, well, our computers are down, so things are a little dicey. I said, okay. My trip was to go from Phoenix, I go to Salt Lake City, change planes, and go into Oakland. Well, I get on the plane in Phoenix, and as I'm on the plane and it's about ready to, I get a text message saying, the second part of your flight has been canceled. So I'm thinking, oh, well, this is interesting. So I fly up to Salt Lake City, and I get off, and I see a person there who's with the airlines. I say, my flight is just canceled. What do I do? And they said, well, go over here and talk to the people on this desk here. Just wait in line. And I said, of course. The line went all the way down the hallway. Took me over an hour to get up to the front of the line. And then when they got there, they said, well, the only way we can get you to Oakland is we're going to fly you back to Phoenix. So you're getting the idea here. Every possible way, it was exquisitely and perfectly frustrating. It was just to the point where I was looking at it and saying, okay, this is probably how it's going to happen just because, and sure enough, it would happen that way. And I was faced with a real dilemma there because as the hours went by, and it ended up taking me 12 and a half hours to get up there. I could have been most of the way to India in that amount of time. And then I got there and there's no luggage. But every step of the way, it had this frustration. And I thought to myself, okay, now what am I going to do here? What am I going to do here? Now the people at the airlines, they were more than hospitable. They were just as frustrated as everyone else, and I could see that it was beyond their control. And there wasn't anybody to blame. It was just sort of, this is the way things are. There's a line in autobiography that came to me. And it was Swami Sri Yukteswar talking to Master. He said, is the whole world going to change for you? Change yourself. Be rid of mosquito consciousness. And you know the story. Master was very frustrated. He was in Serampore. Sri Yukteswar did not give the He didn't tell him to put up the mosquito nets, and so Master was being bit from head to foot by mosquitoes. He was hoping that Master would say something. And finally, Sri Yukteswar said, change yourself. Is the whole world going to change for you? Be rid of mosquito consciousness. But it's not just mosquito. You can pull that word out, and you could put in whatever word is frustrating you at that particular time. Be rid of airline consciousness. Be rid of whatever it might be. This is how we become more even-minded. And these little things that bother us in life, we have to learn how to rise above them. I was also reminded, at that point, change your consciousness. How do you do that? Well, in those situations, the best way that I've found is just to really go within. Master, help me. Master, help me. Master, help me. Start practicing the presence. Start trying to feel that presence within. And usually when you're frustrated, you can really get into it because there's nothing else you can do that's going to help. But I remember a trip to India with Brother Bhaktinanda. And by the way, I'm giving a plug for this summer magazine, which has some tremendous articles in it. But in the middle of this summer 2016 magazine is an article by Brother Bhaktinanda. It's a compilation of his different talks that he's given on practicing the presence. And that's the name of the article, Practicing the Divine Presence. A wonderful article. And I know for a fact that in satsangs and in questions that come up from time to time, people ask, talk about practicing. What is it? How do you do it? This answers everything. This is a Bible of practicing the presence because it shows, Brother Bhaktinanda talks about the evolution of this great experiment that he had. How Master hinted at practicing the presence, how you should work with the thought of Divine Mother in your consciousness from morning to evening. How he worked at it, how he changed things, how he learned something and he changed it, and what the effects were. It's a wonderful, wonderful article, and really something that's really, really worth getting and studying and putting it into practice in your life. This is a portion from that article. And he said that in the early years, Master used to meet with the monks he'd come down through the main hall at Mother Center, and he'd start talking to them, and they'd gather around, and he said just the sound of his voice would pull people. And he said he'd talk, half an hour, sometimes an hour with the monks there. And invariably, he would answer questions that people had in their minds and would address the different concerns and give it guidance on the spiritual path. So this is where we pick up here, where Brother Bhaktivinoda is talking about this. He said, when we all dispersed and returned to our duties, after Master was finished with them, I felt deeply the divine presence and power within. I felt all was well within me and all was well with the world. When we parted, I continued to feel his presence for a time. There was no desire to say anything to anyone. I would just be absorbed in his divine aura. I always took his presence with me when I returned to work or if I went to my quarters. However, this feeling lasted only an hour or so, and then I began to feel human again. I can just hear Brother saying this. I wondered how I could hold on to that divine presence that felt so ethereal. During one informal gathering, he talked about the importance of practicing the presence of God throughout the day. He began by saying to us, keep God in the back of your consciousness throughout the day. A little later, he said, while you are working, mentally repeat Divine Mother's name all day long. Being new on the spiritual path and not having heard or read about practicing the presence of God, I thought it was strange and impractical to work and at the same time think of God or Divine Mother. I didn't realize that I was thinking worldly thoughts anyway as I worked. Since Master asked us to practice this, I decided to try it for a week. I began to mentally chant Om Divine Mother, all day long, but there were times when I would forget. But as soon as I remembered, I began to chant again. Several days later, I began to feel more calm and content. The chanting was sporadic at first, but as I continued to make the effort to chant all day long, I finally established the habit. After 2 weeks, I began to feel a strong, blissful presence in the chest, and I thought, Oh, this is the reason Master wants us to practice the presence. As I continued to chant Om Divine Mother, that little bliss increased into great joy. It was felt not only in my heart, but my body was also full of joy and energy all the time. Now, this was his great experiment, and he was a master at it. He once gave a class to the monks, and in fact, it's in this article, the statement. He told the monks in a class at Mount Washington, Master had to tell me 3 times to practice the presence before I understood. He was just exasperated that he had to hear it 3 times. And all of the monks, all of us, we kind of looked at each other like, how many times have we heard this? We've heard that thousands of times. We're still working at it. But he heard it 3 times and then he took off. And really, but he was very, very good at it. Now, come to the story. And I've told this story through the years. I don't know whether I've ever told it at Convocation, but it still inspires me because when it's as real as when it happened. And I think the lesson that I learned from it is still with me. I went to India in 1987 with Brother Bhaktananda. Uma Mata also went at that time. I was in Daya Mata's office, and she said, I want to send you to India someday. She had been saying that for a couple of years, and then this trip came up, and my job was just to accompany Brother Bhaktananda, look after him, make sure the luggage got from point A to point B, do the logistical work that's necessary on a trip to India. But it ended up being that I traveled around with Brother Bhaktananda for 2 solid months. We were inseparable. I was wherever he went, I went. And at the end of the trip, we ended up at Dwara Hut, which is the retreat up by Babaji's cave. We had a wonderful, few days up there, resting, relaxing, retreating. And then the plan was that we were going to, in cars, we were going to drive back down to New Delhi. And they wanted to take us on a scenic route so that we could see Rishikesh and Hardwar and some of these Himalayan towns and some of the sites in the Himalayas before we went down onto the plains to Delhi. There was a large number of people there at Dwara Hut at the time. It was not only Uma Mata, Sister Gayatri, I think, was there with her at that time, the vice president of YSS, and there were numerous people. And when the day came to travel, it was going to be a 2-day trip. They didn't have enough cars for everyone. So they had to rent a taxi from the local town of Dwara Hut, just a small little town. And they rented a taxi and a driver, and that taxi and driver was to drive myself and Brother Bhaktananda as a part of this caravan. Well, the day came, and the taxi cab drove up, and I knew immediately when it drove up, oh boy. The car came up, and there was smoke coming out the back, and the way it was sitting, I realized there's no springs in that car, and as soon as the driver stopped the car, he bounced out, and he was up under the hood pouring fluids in. I thought 2 things. 1, that car is never going to make it to New Delhi, and 2, that's going to be a royal test to drive in that car all the way. And sure enough, we got in the back, we all took off, and the caravan took off. And the cars in those days, omnipresent everywhere in India, were called ambassadors. They were kind of rounded, old-fashioned looking cars, and the hood was rounded also. And when they first designed these, I'm sure they didn't take someone the size of me and say, okay, let's see, we'll make it this high. I got in the back seat, and I was even scrunched down a little bit. My head was right up near the ceiling. And I was right about the springs. There were no springs in that car. So every time this car hit a bump, which was quite often on these Himalayan roads, my head would go up and hit the top. And as we were going and pulling off and going down this, as the trip started, I was thinking, I can't do this. This is going to be 2 days long? You've got to be kidding me. What were they thinking? Very, very frustrating. Very, very, and beyond that, you could smell smoke inside the car. You could, the driver spoke no English. He spoke Hindi, but so there's no communication there. It was just, it it was a great test for me. I yeah. But at one point, I thought, I wonder how Brother's doing. Now, we were both in the back seat. I was on one side, he was on the other. And I looked over at Brother Bhaktananda, who was seated over on the right side. He had kicked off his sandals, and he was sitting cross-legged on the back seat. His eyes were closed, and he looked more than fine. He looked content, happy. Everything is right with the world. I thought to myself, okay, he's practicing the presence. That's what he's doing. And I had a choice there. I said, okay, now you can continue on in this particular funk that you're in. You won't be able to solve anything. You'll keep bumping your head. You'll keep getting more and more annoyed. Or you can try and do what he's doing. So I started in, almost with a desperation. Help me, Master. I love you, Master. Help me, Master. I love you. Just over and over and over. And every time my mind would go away from it, I'd get back to it. I had constant reminders because my head was hitting the roof. I don't know where the change happened, but somewhere in there, on the first day, in the first couple of hours, somewhere along the line, I started realizing, oh, this is pretty nice. I can feel this. And as we went on, I just kept at it. We went hours and hours, Brother Bhaktananda and I, without saying a word, hours and hours. He'd look over at me. I knew that he knew what I was doing. I knew that he knew that I was trying it. And he was almost saying like, hey, pretty good, huh? And as we went, I just kept it up. When the car stopped, we got back in the car. More intensely, I just kept really working at practicing the presence, trying to feel this presence within. I remember at times we stopped the car, the caravan would stop, there'd be a tea stall, people would have, do you want tea? Oh, it's fine, if I got tea, fine. If not, that's okay. I didn't care one way or the other. Occasionally, Brother and I would say something, or I'd say something to him that he'd find funny. And he'd say, yes, that's funny. Then he'd go back and... That was the way he reacted to funny jokes. Yeah. That's right. But this continued for 2 days. And when we got to New Delhi, we got to the final place where the whole caravan stopped. I was thinking to myself, if someone came up to us, or came up to me and said, wait, changing plans. We want to send you and Brother in this car all around India. I would have been the happiest person in the world. It works, it works. This taking this inner conversation with God, with Guru. And really, when you talk about resilience, or you talk about any of the spiritual qualities, it's about developing a relationship with the divine. Be it Divine Mother, be it Father, be it the Guru. Developing that relationship, it smooths the way in life. Things don't bother us. We stay true to what our goals are, what our efforts are. Now, we have one further thing that helps us also, and that is the practice of yoga. Yoga brings resilience. It brings a steadiness. It brings a desire to keep on going, which really is what, no matter what happens to us in life, we keep on with our goals. Let me read this, because this is from the Master's Bhagavad Gita. He said, yoga provides the method to switch off the life force from the 5 sense telephones and thereby to disconnect the mind and the senses from their external environment. When through yoga practice, the mind, life force, and senses remain unaffected by material restlessness, concentrated on the true self, that disciplined, interiorized, firmly established state is called sattvic driti, The word driti in this context is not exactly fortitude, but rather connotes the inner firmness of self-control and the constancy of soul perception that produces a steady state of fortitude. In that unshakable state, the soul in its pure nature retains mastery over the mind, life force, and senses, and thus remains unperturbed by the temptations of sense objects. A yogi possessing a sattvic driti consciousness keeps his mind settled in the blessed perception of the soul and God, undisturbed by the inroads of sensations. He can therefore wander in worldly life, engaging in dutiful activities, beholding good and evil without being in any way affected or entangled by them. This is what we're striving for. It's not just that we're trying to psychologically change ourselves or work on these little qualities or these little flaws. We're doing that, yes, that's a part of Master's teachings. Work on yourself. Know what you have to change, try to change it. But doing your kriya, doing your practice of your meditation, your studying the teachings, these are ways in which we're attaining this sattvic driti consciousness, this firmness, this ability to keep on no matter what comes our way. And lastly, let me just finish with these words from our Guru. He said, when you are meditating and practicing your kriya, this was in a letter that he wrote to a devotee. He wrote, when you're meditating and practicing your kriya regularly with the love of Divine Mother in your heart, remember, I am there with you in spirit. I will help you to interknit the divine outside with the divine inside yourself. Your joy will increase, and the love you feel will grow, so much that others will notice. Thus you can help them and thereby fulfill my greatest wish, that we in SRF and YSS may be able to awaken God's love in all true thirsty hearts. God bless you all. Have a wonderful convocation. And spend the time. You have an opportunity here in this environment to really kneel into. That was something Brother Bhaktananda used to say. Every once in a while you have to kneel into it. Meaning in practicing the presence or in practicing praying and doing anything where you're inwardly calling on God, you have to take some time to really make an effort to go deep with it. And you have that opportunity here this week. It can be life transforming. That you go away from here and you find that you have transported yourself, changed yourself in such a way that you look at life and you look at the tests that come your way in a completely different way. So may God and Guru bless us all, huh? Jai Guru.